So I'm Debra Farber. I'm going to have each person introduce themselves real briefly, but I'll first do an intro of myself. I am 19 years privacy operational expert, started out in law school, really shifted my whole career, left slowly but surely, got into further and further before decisions are made about the personal data lifecycle. And so I now focus on privacy engineering, privacy tech, helping bring privacy tech to market. I sit on several advisory boards for privacy tech companies like prevailing, Sakuvi, and Privacy Quest. And I'm really excited to be here today. I forgot to mention, I have a privacy engineering podcast you may have heard of called the Shifting Privacy Left podcast. And would love for any of you who are interested in being a guest to come up to me afterwards. But I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we're going to talk a little bit about privacy design patterns for AI systems. And why don't we start at the end?
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Vasudha. I'm from DoorDash. I joined DoorDash about 2 years ago as a privacy program manager. Prior to that, I was working at TikTok, a lesser-known company. I was also a privacy program manager there. I was working on privacy incident response. Basically been in the privacy space for about 8-ish years now, cybersecurity and privacy. Engin?
I'm Engin Bozdag. I work for Uber. I lead the privacy architecture team. I've been at Uber for 5 years. Our team basically does technical privacy reviews, but also collect requirements across the company to build new privacy-enhancing services. Before doing privacy engineering, I was a consultant, also looking into legal requirements, and I was an academic before that, and very happy to be part of this panel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shri. I'm a privacy engineer on Google's privacy incident response team. So my team is responsible for defending against the fires in terms of privacy incidents across Alphabet. So I also do a bunch of prevention and remediation work on this team. So I lead a bunch of privacy engineers who essentially specialize in identifying the threats and patterns and in all the privacy incidents and trying to prevent it as much as we could. But prior to joining Google, I was the first privacy engineer at Autodesk. I did a bunch of privacy impact assessments, and then my background lies in cybersecurity, and then eventually I pivoted to privacy. So I have about 8 years of experience doing privacy, and it's quite interesting so far, I must say.
Yeah. So I like that we have a broad panel where we've got privacy incident response, we've got privacy architect here, and information governance, and as well. And so, I kind of want to start by asking each of you what you see as the biggest privacy risks in machine learning, ML and AI. What's top of mind for you? And let's start with you, Shri.
Sure. So with all the AI tools that we have in the market, what I feel is common users have big powers. So common users have access to very powerful tools, and that can be a double-edged sword. So you could create wonderful systems which are very helpful to the public. You could also create very harmful systems which can perpetuate abuse. So I guess the fact that they are so available and accessible is a bit scary. I think that's top of mind for me. But in terms of privacy risks, so the way I visualize it is there are a lot of privacy risks when it comes to AI across different phases. So you could be designing an AI system, and then you could come across a risk like what's your problem statement? What do you want to do with the AI system? Is it for the greater good or the bad? How are you obtaining this data? How are you gathering this data? How are you cleaning it up? How are you processing it? Is there any data leakage in any of these steps? How did you obtain the data in the first place? Did you receive users' consent to actually use their data for training purposes? And then going into the deployment phase, sorry, not the deployment, the design phase, how are you, what's your what's your use case when it comes to building these systems, and then how you what kind of abuse could exist in these systems, and then how do you deploy these systems in a manner that is consistent with the purpose for which the system was built out, and so on. So I see a lot of privacy risk in these different phases of these AI systems. So it's important to tackle each of these across the different phases as we build these systems.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful, especially going through each of those phases. Vasudha, what about you? What's happening?
I think I agree completely with the data governance, ensuring data quality portion of it. One thing I'd also want to say is, yes, we do need consent for using it in AI and ML specific use cases. The challenge, though, is that we've already collected a lot of data. We have all of the data that we're using for training, and it's now a bit of a catch-up game with like new regulations coming in and how we're trying to comply with it, and make sure that we have obtained consent for using it in such cases. Because as Tamara put so elegantly, it's very hard to unlearn once you've already learned with like data that we've probably not obtained consent for. Apart from that, I think that my biggest, the risks that I see as like the biggest points I think that we'll have to focus on is one. It's not specifically only privacy. It's sort of ethics privacy, which is bias and fairness, making sure that our outputs are giving us exactly what we wanted to without like skewing in any direction. We're making sure that we're right in the middle. And if we do want a little bit of inferred characteristics, we're using it only for the right purposes. So one getting out the output in the right way, and then using those outputs in the right way as well. And then I would say the second point is the fear of like impersonation or misuse of the outputs that we have from like generative AI, from like videos and images. We see a lot of like random celebrities being impersonated to make various sales pitches, which I mean, taking a closer look, it's not actually happening. So I think those are the top of mind for me.
Yeah, I love how you also point to that like fraud of someone's identity. So like kind of your traditional privacy torts and not just the technology itself or misuse of data. Yeah. And you, Engin.
So in conferences like this, we discuss how we can make differential privacy more advanced, how some vendors provide metrics that are not very comprehensive, how do you best anonymize the data, and in the cybersecurity world with AI, there's attention to prompt injections and jailbreaking and whatnot. But I was at IAPP this year talking to some less technical crowd or companies with less resources. Their questions were not around these, more about, will the vendor use my data? Is that covered in the contract? I'm using the enterprise edition, not the public edition. I'm good, right? Or my vendor is ISO 27001 certified, so that should cover the security risk. So they don't have in-house privacy, even security engineers in-house. They don't know the right questions to ask to these vendors. And if you ask some of these questions, for example, we asked one of the popular LLM vendors, turns out, they use the same encryption key for all the customer data, or the keys are rarely rotated. But these questions are not asked. They were surprised that we were asking it because most of their customers weren't asking. So I think data governance is the most prominent most issue today. And the second one, to echo my fellow panelists on the consent, many organizations don't know, you can't just take users' data and use it for another purpose, which could be machine learning and other purposes. And there was an interesting use case in Belgium this year where an individual complained to the Data Protection Authority, and that their transaction data was used for machine learning, and they objected to that use. They argued that their consent was needed, but actually Data Protection Authority argued that the data was sufficiently anonymized, wasn't fully anonymized, but anonymized to a degree, and they weren't trying to re-identify the user. So that was actually fair use under a different lawful basis. So, data minimization will be very important, but few companies are actually enforcing it. If you look at the entire landscape, maybe the big players, those with an army of privacy engineers, they're doing the right thing. But if you look at the larger picture, we still have these issues: lack of consent, risk of secondary use, and data governance.
Yeah, I think you've definitely highlighted a gap between kind of the legal lens on generative AI and AI generally and engineering. So you mentioned data governance. Vasudha, I'd love to hear a little bit about what are the key components of effective data governance for machine learning?
I think just from a machine learning governance framework, it's important to know what your scope is, first and foremost. I think it's important to have an inventory, have discovery of all of your machine learning use cases, all of your AI cases within your organization. And that sort of goes hand in hand with when you're defining the scope of your data governance or your machine learning governance, AI governance program, and seeing your goals. What do you want to do? Do you want to have like a risk assessment template? Do you want to have risk tags? Or how do you define what is risky for you? How do you define what is high risk, low risk, medium risk? And none of this has to be carved in stone. It can be refined as you go along. And the reason I say that it can be refined is because once you start, as a privacy program manager, when I speak to machine learning engineers to understand what their model does, it takes a completely different path from the questionnaire that I had in mind. I start digging in deeper into other use cases, and then I keep tweaking my questionnaire based on that. So I think that is having your process, having your standard operating procedure in mind is another component, apart from the inventory and discovery. And the third, I think, would be just implementing all of your solutions, whether that's a path to get feedback from end users who are impacted by the model, a path for end users to opt out of your model when it's applicable, a solution that would tag your data at the time of collection, making sure that you're specifying the purpose, you're specifying what is sensitive, what is not sensitive, and then cascading those tags into when it's being used in machine learning models for training. And then, I think having that sort of understanding, the end-to-end path of where are you getting these, where are you getting the data from, and how it's being used in the machine learning model is key. There's also various other tooling that can be implemented alongside to aid your own risk assessment, or to aid human reviews or audits of how these models are working, which is like an ML observability tool or a bias tracing tool to understand how is the model performing. I think implementation of those and operationalizing those solutions that you have in mind to reach your North Star, I think, is a third component. That's it.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful. Shri, what are the most effective methods for detecting and responding to privacy incidents in AI systems? And how can these methods be integrated into the development process?
Sure. So one of the important aspects of detection would be continuous monitoring, right? So for AI systems, the way we could do continuous monitoring is to build some sort of anomaly detection systems. So these systems can essentially highlight when there are unusual data access patterns, if the data that is if the model output is attributed to the right users, because you don't want to share one user's data with the other, and then do you have any unexpected data fields which are being spit out from the model? Are you actually gathering consent from the user before you use their data for training the models and so on? So anomaly detection and then privacy impact assessments are something that we use commonly, but privacy impact assessments for AI. So whenever we have AI touching system, meaning when AI can be used to actually infer or predict and reason in a system. So essentially at those touch points, you make sure that you're able to identify what the privacy risks are for that system, make sure that at those specific points, you have the ability to detect if something is not working as intended. So definitely these two pieces come to mind. So when it comes to detection, not all companies, like how Engin pointed out, have the ability to build out like huge detection systems. So I would say starting small, being able to come up with some rule-based detection systems, and then adding a lot more automation to it as in increments would be ideal for like a for a mid-sized organization, I would say, or like a smaller organization. And then your second point about responding to privacy incidents, right? So when it comes to responding to privacy incidents, one of the key focuses is, are you stopping the bleeding? How quickly are you able to mitigate the damage? And then how effectively are you able to identify the impact to the users, and then how do you go into preventing these issues for future? So you want to allocate the right amount of resources for the kind of issue that you have at hand. So the first piece is to understand what's the severity of your issue, and based on the organization, the way they define severity can be very different. So it could be basically how many users are impacted due to this issue, what is the abuse, and so on. So then, and then eventually you assign like, how quickly does this warrant a response? So that is a priority aspect to it. So, and then eventually you go into involving the right stakeholders. So legal is always our best friend when it comes to incident response. So you involve legal, you have the developers, you have like the data stewards and so on. Depending on the makeup of the organization, you have all your stakeholder engagement. And then if it's a bigger privacy issue which warrants some sort of regulatory disclosures and so on, you want to make sure that you have the right PR and like the regulatory folks to advise you and guide on all of those notification requirements. So essentially, when it comes to incident response for AI systems, I don't view it as so different from a security incident response or like privacy incident response for a non-AI incident. So at its crux, it's the same process that you follow, but when it comes to impact analysis or like notification requirements, there could be subtle changes because of just the kind of beast the AI systems are. So yeah, that's my take on the response piece. And then what kind of methods that we can use for integrating into the developmental process, right? So shifting privacy left, like we all talk about it, but what does it actually mean, right? So you start off with like data minimization, like how Engin pointed out, right? So you want to make sure that you have all of this data that you gather from users, but you don't need all of that to train your systems or like to process in this context. So you also want to make sure that when a user is a recipient of an AI product, or like when they're consuming the service, they should be able to understand how their data is going to be used further, like, what's the life cycle, what's going on with my data. So I often find my mom asking me, do you want to try this feature and so on, but what are you going to take from me to give this in return? So that's a common question which like a non-technical audience would have. So that's where explainable AI comes into picture, mm-hmm. right? So you want to make sure that you are accountable, you're being transparent to your users about how their data would be used, and you also give them an opportunity to opt out if they do not want their data to be used for any of those purposes. So the key things here are about transparency, accountability, consent, and also providing users the control. So that's one way of looking at it. And then when it comes to the whole algorithmic design and like the development phase, you want to make sure that you look for biases. You want to be fair, and is there an adequate representation? Is there diversity in your training set, and so on? So yeah, I'll keep it brief because I spoke a bunch of stuff. You can keep going on, but yeah.
Awesome. No, thank you. That's really helpful to give us the side of kind of responding from like a threat perspective. Let's turn to, the panel we have about privacy patterns. So let's get a little into privacy by design, and maybe first start with Engin. What types of harmful privacy patterns have you seen with respect to AI ML as of late?
I think the first thing is to manipulate users or organizations to provide more data so that that data can be used for machine learning training. We've heard the news of a company recently that unless you opt out from sharing, the data might be used for training. I'm not going to name, but we probably all heard about it. So I think then comes the AI generated manipulation. So it could be like deepfakes that we just mentioned today, but also imagine generative AI is used to generate an image in an e-commerce site, and which, the image of the product is very different than the actual image. That's under something called false appearance, or just impersonations, not necessarily impersonating another human being, but AI could be, act like a human and nudge the user to provide more data, which again, used for other purposes. And another thing that I heard recently, this is research from this year, where LLMs could be manipulated so that a particular product is recommended to other users, kind of an SEO, but much more on the LLM space. Hopefully we don't have marketing folks here getting ideas, but we'll probably hear more about such cases later, I think.
Well, that's fascinating. The manipulation angle is one that we talk about for disinformation and news and stuff, but I hadn't even thought about manipulating for marketing purposes. It makes sense. Vasudha, what are some strategies to address bias and fairness in AI models while maintaining privacy protections?
Yeah, I think age-old techniques like diversifying your data set, making sure that you're getting rid of inherent biases in your data, in your training data itself. I know that it's sort of counterintuitive to say that collect more data, diversify your data when you're trying to preserve privacy and you're trying to talk about data minimization, which is when I think things like federated learning would come in. And I know that we discussed earlier that that's not entirely fail-safe. So hopefully, the engineers in the room today would be able to explore this area a little more and, give us, a solution to how we can make it completely foolproof. But yeah, I think differential privacy, adding, noise to our data set and making sure that, there's lesser impact in terms of like privacy threats to the data that we're using when we're using it for training purposes, I think would be a way to make sure that we can have a large, without compromising the amount of data that we're using to train our models, so that we're not compromising on bias or fairness. And then of course there's also things that we can add as like a human in the loop, making sure that we have human beings auditing or overseeing the outputs of our models when possible, and then of course adding tooling. I know that we're not there yet where we can rely on tooling completely, but there are new bias tracing or bias auditing techniques coming in. Should try and explore some of those and make sure that we can always conduct tests to make sure that we can test it with a known data set that has all of these demographic characteristics, and then see how much are we inferring from an unknown data set where any of these demographics are not already present, and how much are we able to infer such demographic characteristics, and how accurately are we able to do that, and then of course make sure that again, not I guess not all bias is bad. Not all inferences are bad. Just making sure that we're using them for the right reasons would be key in how we're approaching this.
That's pretty comprehensive. Thank you for that. Engin, how effective are current data anonymization techniques in preserving privacy without compromising the utility of the data for machine learning?
Yeah, I think we had a very interesting talk yesterday on how do we save anonymization, and as pointed out there, the legal requirements are not entirely clear. Like there are disagreements among different privacy authorities. For instance, I think last year there was a case where EDPS mentioned the original data set should be deleted unless then it wouldn't be considered anonymized, where there were disagreements where if there are sufficient technical controls between the original data set and the anonymized data set, that could be enough to call it anonymized. So those discussions are ongoing. We have still research looking into differential privacy and to get it more easier to implement for the average organization. But often it's not that easy to deploy yet. Organizations can hire experts to do one time of anonymization, but doing this on an ongoing basis and scale, it's not easy. We have vendors that offer solutions for anonymized data, but I notice many of them that just use regular expressions that works in specific locales but doesn't work everywhere. There are open source solutions. I think there was a talk yesterday by the Snap team on using Presidio. We also experiment with it, but there are issues around false positives, latency, so you often need in-house engineers to kind of adapt it for your use cases. I think we should start and be a bit pragmatic and expect organizations to start with simple things like redaction, deletion, so that we reduce the risk space, and on the long term, we eye for the more reliable solutions on the in the future. So let's try to reduce step by step. That's what I would say. Excellent.
No, that's helpful to hear about the different viability of using the current solutions. Shri, how do we gauge the effectiveness of solutions deployed and then gain privacy assurance from them?
Yeah, I guess when you say assurance, one thing that comes to mind is risk, right? Like risk engineering, like making sure that through your risk assessments, you're able to identify if, what are my threats? How am I able to minimize these threats? What are the inherent risks here? What compensatory controls do I have to make sure that I have mitigated them, and then what remains? So overall, risk assessment could be one strategy that we could do for assurance. The other side that I would like to point out is incident response. So when you don't receive incidents in around one particular area, it doesn't mean that it's all perfect and it's you don't receive incidents. You can only the more you dig deeper, you will find flaws in any system. That's how complex systems are. But using incident response to essentially brute force and find. So it's basically some sort of red teaming plus incident response combination. That way you're trying to identify if the system can be exploited in a manner which is inconsistent with the way it was designed to be.
Is that with privacy tests, adversarial tests,
exactly
red teaming and pen testing and
exactly.
Okay.
So you could probably start doing threat modeling, then you could do red teaming, and then eventually you could once you have incidents coming out of it, then you try to see what preventative actions can we take from the prevention, the postmortem lens of incident response, and then you basically repeat the cycle alongside with the development processes.
That makes a lot of sense. Vasudha, did you have anything to add to that, to how we gauge the effectiveness of solutions deployed and gain privacy assurance?
Yeah, I think it is definitely a field that's developing. We do have I think there was a video by a blog post by the former CISO of Robinhood, who mentioned that there were like close to 100 different kinds of attack vectors, threat vectors that could essentially take advantage of an LLM. Data poisoning or prompt injection being two top that he discussed in that video. But yeah, I think the fact is that we're never going to get to 100%. It's really hard to get to 100% of privacy assurance when we're talking about AI, or even when you're talking about general algorithms. But trying to evolve that space, trying to keep adding more to your database of what are we seeing as threats, or how are we protecting against this known threat, is definitely something that we should keep thinking about. And of course, echoing what she said about red teaming or pen testing, making sure that we're doing everything that we can in terms of adversarial testing to see we're maximizing our coverage from a security and a privacy perspective. But apart from that, I would say that we shouldn't give up on human audits still. We should still continue taking a look at what's coming out, what outputs are being generated, and how reliable or how accurate or how trustworthy are our systems, and that's something to keep in mind.
Awesome, thank you so much. Engin, what should privacy engineers be aware of regarding upcoming AI regulations?
Yeah, the EU AI Act is, I think that the draft is finally accepted by all the member states. I haven't read it in detail, but there's a very good concise summary. I really recommend everyone take a look. It looks like they're really distinguishing between different types of systems. Not every AI system is equal. Some are prohibited, like social scoring. Some are deemed high risk, for example, in recruiting or insurance codes, and some are low risk. Generative AI systems, it's not entirely clear where they fall. Things like chatbots, they're deemed as low risk, but they have to be more transparent towards the users. I think regardless, privacy engineers will need to do some of the threat modeling of these systems because some of the requirements are actual technical documentation demonstrating that the risk is addressed, the risk management systems. So there is a more requirements on the technical side. There are already some frameworks available to do threat modeling for AI systems. We have the OWASP threats for LLMs or security and AI guys, but we also have things like Plot for AI, which is very comprehensive. I think it has around 86 threats ranging from safety, privacy, and security. So there will definitely be work to be done by privacy and security professionals since those requirements are explicitly set in the legislation.
Yeah, and this Plot for AI that was created by Isabel Barbara, she took that from, extended basically the Linden threat modeling for privacy approach and then applied it to AI. And so it kind of has a basis in a well-tested framework. So, excuse me. Let's see. Vasudha, what are some areas which are evolving and we don't really have good solutions for yet?
So I was reading, the CPPA draft text for automated decision making last week, and
just for fun.
Yeah, for work. But yeah, I think it basically rationalizes into like, you can either have human appeals, or you can have, what they're calling the pre-use notice, where we're, laying transparently what we're using the PII for, almost to the level of like a model card, because they've specifically mentioned, don't say something vague like, we're using your data for security or for fraud. Right. We need to be more specific than that. So I think those are, new things that companies have to come up with, giving more transparency into what we're doing with personal information. And then also providing, a way to appeal or to provide feedback. I think that's something that's going to be important. Even in, Engin was talking about e-commerce or a recommendation engine, right? Where when you're shopping for something, someone else says, you may also like another related product. It would be helpful for the algorithm to know, was that actually a relevant recommendation or not, and then take that feedback in and learn from it. I think those are like helpful areas that we're seeing come up. And then, yeah, of course, I think it was discussed earlier today that removing someone's data or opting them out, or trying to action the right to be forgotten, and removing this person's data from the training data set is not all that simple. It's not like you just remove it and then you're good to go. You have to unlearn that person's data. You have to lose memory of whatever data you've collected and trained on. So I think that is definitely an evolving space, and people are exploring how that will work, and people are exploring how do we phase out data that we've used and we no longer have consent for, and how do we also prove that we've done what we're saying we're doing. That's important too, because pretty sure we'll have a regulator knocking at our door asking us to prove something like that, which is hard to do.
Yes, it would be nice to have some guarantees for that, but maybe the privacy engineering community will have some solutions for such guarantees. Shri, do you have anything to add to that, like the areas that are evolving that we don't really have good solutions for?
Well, I agree with most of what Vasudha pointed out, but I guess explainable AI, which I was mentioning earlier, right? So I feel like that is still something where more work could be done. We don't have enough. Explanations given to users about how their data could be used, how would it be processed, like why are they seeing certain recommendations, based on what activity of mine did you come up with this conclusion that this might be appropriate for me, and so on. So maybe companies doubling down on making users more comfortable while they interact with these systems, I think can be more helpful in gaining user trust, basically. That way, users are more confident when they interact with these systems. So I think that's one thing that I'd like to.
Yeah, that's a super good point. We need also education of users. They're just using these tools without really having a good understanding of how they work and how it's creating outputs for them. All right, so I think we're kind of getting to closing here. We have about 5 minutes left. So I'd like to talk about, what are some of the words of wisdom or calls to action you have for the privacy engineers in the audience that you want to leave them with today? We could start with you, Vasudha.
Yeah, I think I just mentioned one, which was, trying to have ways to prove that, our privacy assurance solutions are doing what they say they're doing. I think that would be definitely nice to have. But I think it's. I work in the privacy program management space, and that sits within the legal department. I would say that for privacy engineering, legal shouldn't be someone who adds friction. It's definitely we're also concerned that we upcoming regulations might stop the way that we're trying to innovate with AI, with ML. But we're willing to work with engineers to make sure that we're not stopping innovation. We're not trying to harm whatever development or technological advances we're trying to make. But I think it's definitely important for not just the privacy engineering community. I think all of the the software developers, the ML engineering community, legal, everyone to work together and make sure that one, we're going to comply with all of the regulations that are coming up. So definitely have to educate yourselves about all of the upcoming regulations. There are a ton of them. So I think there are a lot of different talks and blog posts and tools that summarize what all of these regulations are trying to get us to do. So yeah, I think education is key. Speaking to other teams in your organizations or other organizations, making sure we're not like only focusing on privacy engineering, not focusing only on legal and stopping innovation, but all of us working together as a community to make sure that we're doing one, because it's definitely not just a privacy topic. It's a topic about ethics. It's a topic about fraud as well, safety of users. So making sure that we're all working towards doing the right thing with the data that we have.
So I'm hearing, get out of your silos and, collaborate within your organizations and even outside of your organizations. What about you, Engin?
Yeah, I think I would like to echo that get feedback from communities that are affected by your AI systems. Sometimes, we're all busy, we always discuss internally, but we might not know what the communities are actually asking for. I sometimes check user forums to see what people are thinking about privacy of our company's products. There might be concerns that are not based on reality, but maybe we can do better in terms of explaining what the existing practices are. I think a second thing to think about is, as privacy engineers, don't wait until your legal teams come up to you with these new upcoming legislations or things to do. Try to be proactive and help design systems that are flexible enough that adapts to different legislations. And also try to define roles and responsibilities across the company. For instance, if you're going to build an anonymization system that can also be extended to detect abuse monitoring, who's going to do that? Do you have the right skill set? Maybe you need to talk to some machine learning specialists across the company. So break the silos for sure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I bet you're also bringing some people over from security who understand how to, a hacker mindset and teach them privacy too. So, and you? Sweet.
So slightly different lens to this, aside from what Engin and Vasudha pointed out already. We need to make our AI systems more inclusive. So that way we have various audiences which are interfacing with these systems, but while you remove biases and trying to understand the underrepresented groups who might be interacting with these systems and trying to make your system more inclusive. That's one angle which I feel is forgotten quite easily.
Yeah.
So I'd like to point out that. And then just in general about personal privacy, I feel like there's a lot of intrusion into personal privacy of late, especially because AI systems are so powerful that they can actually pick pieces of information from multiple sources and gather inferences about you on the web, so you don't know how you're being watched. So I guess trying to think of the user first and put the user first. Try to think about user trust and then try to build out your systems, keeping the user front center.
Yes, I think that's part of my mantra as well. Always remember that we're not just working within businesses who have risk to reduce, called privacy, but we have people who we want to protect. Yeah. And unlike, security has to protect people too, but unlike securing systems and networks, privacy is ultimately about the people and data related to them. So thank you. I think that's the end of our panel.